Hey, Patrick Coffin here. Do you like a good night's sleep? I do too. Big time. This episode of The Patrick Coffin Show is brought to you by MyPillow. Go to mypillow.com, save. What do I mean by save? Instead of paying $120 for a pair of these bad boys, you're only going to pay $69.98. It's a great deal on pillows. I love my MyPillows. If you're not getting enough sleep each night, you're not going to be able to be the best that you can be. You're not going to be able to build a culture if you're always exhausted. These are washable, dryable. They're low maintenance. They're made in the USA. You get a 60-day money-back guarantee. There's no risk. And it's a 10-year warranty, guaranteed not to go flat. Ever had that experience? You buy a pillow, it's nice and fluffy, and then a month later it's pancake flat? Thought so. Go to mypillow.com. My name, Patrick, is the promo code. That gets you the coupon. Or call 1-800-794-9652. That's 800-794-9652. You're welcome. So glad you're with us. Fantastic topic once again. We talk about Ireland and the restoration of the Irish people and the Christian DNA of that great country and how it's, I think, a kind of canary in the coal mine. As goes Ireland, so goes Europe. Our guest is Gemma O'Doherty. She is an Irish investigative journalist and documentarian, and I would say she's a popular YouTuber, except that's part of the inspiration for having her on the show. Hey, Gemma, thanks for joining us.
Hi, Patrick. Thank you so much for having me on.
I've been binge watching YouTube channels commenting on you from your critics and enemies, and what made me laugh out loud, literally LOL, just this morning, is the number of people that stormed their comment boxes supporting you. Because the people who are opposing you tend to be the virtue signaling crowd, the ones that cry racist, homophobe, Islamophobe. It's like almost like a Tourette syndrome. No one offers arguments against the objections that you're raising and what's at stake in your being blatantly, obviously censored by our superiors at Google by having both of your YouTube channels taken down. Maybe for folks who've never heard of you before, Gemma, what's the compressed story of you and why your channels were brought down?
Yeah, okay. I'll try and be brief in relation to that. I worked, Patrick, within the mainstream media for almost 20 years. I was a senior reporter with the Irish Independent, which is the biggest daily. And around 2010 or so, I started working on a lot of corruption, mainly within the police. Unfortunately, we have a police force that is highly politicized and very corrupt. So I was focusing mainly on murders and paedophilia that had been covered up by the state. And I was working with a police whistleblower. And at the time, around 2012, the company, the newspaper group, was taken over by a man called Denis O'Brien, who is Hillary Clinton, the Clinton Foundation's biggest Irish donor. He has big business interests down in Haiti and would have been very close to the Clintons, would have flown them in whenever they came to Ireland. Mm-hmm. So he took over the newspaper group, and it was made very clear to us that investigative adversarial journalism was now a no-no. And I was basically asked to stop writing about corruption. I was told my job would be gone if I didn't. And I sued the company, and I was successful. I sued them for defamation. I won 3 legal actions. So that gave me the ability to be my own boss. And, you know, I was an experienced journalist. So I was able then to get on YouTube, and I built up my YouTube channel. I made a documentary about our longest and youngest missing person, a little girl who was sexually assaulted and murdered in Donegal in the north of the county, in a very remote part of Ireland. And mm-hmm. her murder had been covered up by, unfortunately, the police here and a political party known as Fianna Fáil. And that documentary went on to have nearly 1 million views. I started live streaming last year, and I was going very deep into the globalist agenda that is destroying Ireland. We know all of the same ingredients: open borders, 5G, compulsory vaccination, abortion, all of that. And we've recently seen how in Ireland now Catholic statues are being attacked, Catholic sites are being attacked. We're seeing decapitations of statues. So I had spoken about that in a recent video. And I'd also mentioned the fact that a Nigerian Muslim living here had been involved in a rape of a child, a gang rape of a child, and the media were speaking about him. He's a footballer, but they were failing to mention this very important fact. So that video was banned, and I questioned YouTube about that. I waited, I appealed, and nothing happened. So because we have the European headquarters in Dublin, all of the big tech headquarter here, because Ireland is the most corrupt country in Europe and they know they can get away with murder. So I decided a week later I would go down and speak to them in person. And unfortunately I was not allowed to enter the building. And as a result of my going down there, their response was to remove my channels completely. So I lost about 40,000 viewers, all of my videos gone.
Were they both devoted to the same kinds of political, cultural questions, or were they have different themes?
Well, no, they were really what had happened was my first one, they stopped my live streaming on my first one, indirectly related to this documentary, because they had told me they got a spurious copyright complaint in from a man who is currently before our courts for having attacked a woman in her car with a hatchet. He attacked the car, and he put in a spurious complaint that I did not have permission to use the picture of this child, which I did have, but Google wouldn't listen to me. So they basically gave me a strike. This was a few months ago, and told me that I had to remove her picture, and her picture has been the backdrop of all of my videos. So I had to remove her face from every single video, which was extremely laborious and time consuming, but I did it to keep within their obnoxious terms and conditions. They're covering up the rape and murder of a child. And so when the strike was on that channel, I set up another one, and that channel had really grown. At one stage over the last few weeks, I was covering Hillary Clinton's unexpected visit recently to Dublin, in which she, I believe, has been staying in a house fully equipped with underground tunnel, etc. Those videos that I was making about her being in Dublin were going viral, and as I say, I was getting about 1,000 subs a day. So they had to shut down both of my channels. Sure.
Yeah, too much truth. Sorry. Yeah, I'm sure you're familiar with Douglas Murray, the British journalist.
I have his here in front of me, yeah.
Douglas has noted, and I've said this before, some of my audience members know what I'm about to say, but it's the phenomenon of the reporter being criticized for being divisive, etc., rather than following the finger pointing that the journalist or the writer is drawing attention to and talking about that. Whether it's Lee Rigby, who was decapitated in broad daylight by two migrant youths shouting Allahu Akbar, when he described that as a Muslim terror incident, he was attacked as Islamophobic, and no one really knows about the case he's talking about, referring to. This is a lot of messenger shooting practice, right?
Completely. They do hit jobs on me the whole time, the mainstream, and I've just had a journalist on to me there from a really obnoxious newspaper, but I have been speaking out a lot against the Islamification of Ireland. Ireland will, if we don't stop now, I would say we will, Sharia law is creeping in. We know Birmingham, for example, just half an hour from us here is the British city of Birmingham. It used to be an Irish city, but now it is so Islamic, and the Irish quarters of Birmingham are now completely Muslim. So Ireland will be gone in the blink of an eye because we've such a tiny population here, and it's a tiny place. The public are people are very, very submissive and very distracted with other things. A lot of them are caught up in debt, slavery, etc. So I have been speaking out about the Islamification of Ireland, the fact that a lot of our big food producers, meat producers, have gone halal, which to me is barbaric. The fact that we see so many burqas and niqabs and hijabs on the streets of Dublin now, it's sickening. We in Ireland have the second highest number of jihadis per capita out of 26 countries, and we have ISIS training camps in our mountains. This is what has happened to us. 100 years of freedom, and this is the country we end up with. It's sickening.
Nature abhors a vacuum, and so does supernature. Man is naturally built to worship. We're here for an end far more glorious than we can ask or imagine. And yet, if you jettison the Christian roots of your culture and you adopt another religion altogether, then almost overnight you have a different culture. Cult, right? The root word, to cultivate, to till, or to worship. So if your God is a slave master and you're a slave, it's going to be a very different world to live in than if you believe God is a father and you're a son or a daughter. So that's the clash of civilizations no one seems to want to talk about. They just would rather messenger shoot on you.
Yes, that's right. And the mainstream media here have spent the last 10, 15 years, there's been an onslaught against the Catholic Church here. They've created fake stories to bring in abortion. We're a profoundly pro-life country, but with the help of George Soros, the mainstream media, Google, we now are seeing 900 babies being killed in Irish hospitals a month. So it's devastating. It's devastating. The words Irish Catholic now are it's a term of hatred. It inspires so much hatred in people. And those two words are joined at the hip. Irish Catholic. That's what we are, predominantly 95%. But they want to rip our identity as Christians, as Catholics from us.
I was in Ireland I went from Dublin, Knock, Sneem to Galway, and I spent many nights in many Irish pubs talking to millennials. And in between sips of beer, I brought up what I do for a living, and they were interested to know that not everybody is a lapsed Catholic. And invariably the answer to when I would say, so why did you guys leave the church? They'd say, the Tuam controversy, the scandals, the bad priests. And I said, well, so are there corrupt cops here too? Well, of course there are. Well, why don't you just disband the entire police force? A few bad cops justifies the entire idea of law enforcement, doesn't it? So that was step number 2. And then I said, this made everybody laugh because I think I was onto something. Isn't it true that before the scandals you were sleeping with your girlfriends, and now the scandals happen and you feel better about it because you've jettisoned yourself from the church's authority? And one young man, I won't name him because I'm still in touch with him, he said, our generation is out from under the authority of the Catholic Church, but we don't know whose authority we're under right now. Which means that the population is very manageable, so that Ireland can slowly or quickly, depending on how long a view you see of the whole story, Ireland is now an American colony. True or false?
Oh, completely true. Completely. Well, it's a big tech colony. Like, I wish we were, sometimes over here, we wish we were part of what's happening in America now, because at least you have a man who seems to really love his people. Unlike the person that leads this country. But but this idea of the authority of the Catholic Church, I think a lot of that is a myth as well, certainly in relation to Ireland. Like, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and I had a really good experience of Catholicism. I went to a convent school where we had nuns who we really looked up to. And I grew up in an era where to get yourself pregnant outside of marriage or with somebody who was not the right person, you were told this will ruin your life. You won't have a career, you won't, probably be financially secure. And these were the moral standards that were set for us that protected us. These standards protected us. They weren't beaten into us by any means. I did not have any negative experience growing up. However, I have to say that many of my male counterparts did. And this was because the monasteries of Ireland were infested by communists and Freemasons who perverted them. And they, in turn, those monks went in to schools. And unfortunately, many, many men in Ireland in their 40s, 50s, 60s were sexually abused as children. But I have to say, a lot of women had very good experiences under the nuns, and the nuns were wonderful in many, many cases. And those women now have been, they gave so much to education. They set up a brilliant health service where the hospitals were immaculate and nobody got, all these contagious diseases that they get now when they go into hospitals. But they've ruined, since the state took over education and health, we just see both of those services into total decline. Yeah,
you see the exodus from so many religious sisters and teaching brothers from their vows in the 70s and 80s. And of course, what replaces them are usurious rates of tuition, which prices most Catholic parents out. So they have to send their kids to either, if they don't want to homeschool, they have to go to public schools. I'm not familiar with the nature of public schooling in Ireland. Is there a kind of cultural Catholic backdrop, or are they purely secular?
No, there is. I mean, most of the schools are Catholic. Most of them are Catholic, and most of them begin with the saint's name. They're trying to, we call it the decrucifixion. They have, what they're doing now under the current government is they are removing all of the Catholic symbols around schools and hospitals. They're actually removing crosses and crucifixes from hospital wards where people are sick and dying. They may have the only comfort might be in the sign of that cross on the ward. But no, these are the things that our government is doing now. It's beyond sickening. The schools are completely infested, appalling things. They want to teach pornography, literacy. They're going to start introducing disgusting things you can only imagine. And some of the Catholic schools are the worst, Patrick. We had a situation recently in a school which is run by the Catholic hierarchy. The Archbishop of Dublin is the patron. And they decided there a few weeks ago that they were going to suggest that little boys might be sexually confused, and they were going to give them the option to wear dresses and skirts to school.
Sure.
So I went straight over to that school. It's fairly close to where I live. And we did a stream. I spoke to the wonderful priest who happens to live next door in the presbytery in the church next door. And he's a very rare breed in Ireland, an outspoken priest who's true to his vocation. And he said, this is absolutely outrageous. I mean, I call this child abuse. And we now know that school is not going to go ahead, and those little boys will not be encouraged to wear skirts. So some of the Catholic schools are the worst, but the parents said, no, we're not having this. We weren't even asked.
Yeah, I just saw a photo of one of these drag queen reading sessions in public schools here in America. Mercifully, they're small in number, but they're growing because the American Library Association is deliberately setting up workshops for librarians to get around parental objections. And they're definitely pushing this on purpose. And it was a toddler, I can barely say it because it makes me so angry, lying on top of a drag queen in the library, wrapped in cellophane. Now, you put a Roman collar on that drag queen and see what the story looks like in the news, right? It sounds like the enemies of the church are working to destroy within, and the external enemies are also destroying, statues and crucifixes. So external and internal attack.
Absolutely. And as I was saying, Patrick, we've had a lot of attacks recently on Catholic sites in particular. We know in France at the moment there are 3 attacks a day on Catholic sites, on Christian sites, 3 a day. When they happen here, it's silence. The media don't want to know. Last week there was an attack on a mosque, and the media nearly announced a week of national mourning. Now nobody was injured, but yet Catholic sites are vandalised and they don't bat an eyelid. It's the same narrative everywhere, but it was lead item on the news, headlines, attack on mosque, because the Irish are so hateful and xenophobic, and they must be made to feel guilty about the fact that they have welcomed in so many Muslims into this country. They really have no place in Ireland, and I'm going to be honest about that, because I'm increasingly outspoken. Islam, I don't believe, has any place in a Western democracy. I don't like the idea that women are treated as second-class citizens. All around the streets of our country now, we're seeing burqas, as I've said. Halal meat, obviously, is barbaric. And, we are producing so many jihadis, and it's just outrageous. It's absolutely outrageous.
Gemma, are you in touch with Muslims who are not radicalized, who do want to integrate into Irish culture, who accept the Christian patrimony, who are anti-radical, anti-terror? Because I would think there's some rapprochement or common ground that you would have with them.
Of course, and I'm not in touch with them because they don't speak out when we see, radical Islam bursting forward every so often. We had a story a few months ago about there being ISIS training camps in one of the most beautiful mountain ranges in the country. We've had, an ISIS bride who is actually Irish, and she was in the Irish Army, our defence forces, because we're a neutral state, not that you'd know it, because we have your military's jets flying in and out of our airport in Shannon a lot. But so this woman was out in Libya, I think, or Syria. She was a full-blown ISIS radical, married to an ISIS soldier, and she's being completely rehabilitated now, welcomed back by the government. And we don't hear moderate Muslims speaking out and saying this is outrageous. She said that she left Ireland to get away from gays. And no moderate Muslims are speaking out. That is because the breed of Islam that we have in Ireland is extremely radical.
And they don't take criticism lying down, or they don't brook it at all. And if you're raised in that culture, you have to pick which ditch you want to die in, what's going to be your main battle.
Exactly. And I think a lot of people say, to me, oh, well, we know it's not really the Muslims, it's another group of people who are driving this. And I say, look, I don't care if these people who are driving it are from Jupiter or Mars. Ireland has seen enough bloodshed. We finally got our act together back in the 90s. We got peace on our island. And now we are asking for mayhem, and we're getting it. We are seeing the most horrific crimes. Sadly, in many cases, they are being committed by people from third world countries. As all across our continent, we're seeing this. And we feel we've had enough. Like we finally got peace, we got stability, and now it's like we're going back to the dark days. And Ireland is pretty unique in Europe because we didn't go off and colonize anywhere else. We only have one very small island. We've always had a history of emigration. We have 35 million Irish people in America who claim Irish heritage, and they are proud of their heritage. And we want to maintain the island that many of their parents and grandparents left. We want it to remain Irish so that maybe they can bring their children and grandchildren back and see, the place that their parents and grandparents grew up in. But it will be radically different. It'll be full of mosques.
Yeah, the Irish, when you said that they haven't taken over, there's not an imperial spirit within Ireland, but there is an evangelical spirit within Ireland. You think of all the African countries. Start the list with Africa, of the White Fathers, the Holy Ghost Fathers, the Jesuits from the place formerly known as the Land of Saints and Scholars. Now Ireland's being, as I understand from people in Ireland who've told me, they're being evangelized by former missionary lands because Ireland is now a missionary territory.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, but I was talking to someone today about how difficult it is to get a missionary visa to get into Ireland. That doesn't surprise me at all. So we are now relying on foreign missionaries, but they can't even barely get visas. I wonder why.
Right. Do you think this issue, that the battle you're fighting and the people in Ireland who care about restoring Ireland as she was, are more focused on cultural questions and principles and ideas more than skin color? Is not skin color, being white, absolutely relevant to this debate?
Yeah, I think in Ireland we don't see ourselves as white because we've never had anything to compare it to. We're very, very homogenous country. There was only ever emigration. There was never immigration. So we just see ourselves as Irish with green blood pulsing through our veins. And I think what happened, Patrick, was, mass uncontrolled immigration began about 15, 20 years ago. And we now have 20% of the population immigrant, which is absolutely, it's insane because we've such a tiny population here and it's a tiny island. It's starting to feel incredibly crowded. But what happened was, I think we thought we were very cool because the world and its mother seemed to want to come here. And there was this period, where because we've been so downtrodden and we have this inferiority complex and maybe a good dose of Catholic guilt as well, that, we're loved. The rest of the world wants to come here and let's invite everyone in. Now we have a housing crisis out of control. We have homelessness beyond anything. We never had homelessness. It was always because I suppose we had good Catholic convents and people who were willing to look after people who were in difficulty with housing. And we had a good, strong community spirit as a country. We didn't have homelessness before. Now we have it. 10,000 people tonight will be sleeping on our streets or in hostels or in hotels. No need for it. 1 in 3 social housing units goes to a non-national. It doesn't make sense.
Ireland seems to be parallel to Quebec. Very Catholic in history. In the 20s, Ireland had the highest birth rate on earth. Families with families over the number of 10 children, the norm. Nowadays, Quebec has dipped, along with Germany and Russia and Japan, well below replacement rates. It seems as though in Quebec, possibly in Ireland and Malta, to use another formerly very strong Catholic bastion, that the dominant language in 50 years will be Arabic. Yeah. Is that a Chicken Little mentality, or is that more demographical fact, do you think?
Well, I predict Ireland will be across in about 20 years, unless we scream stop now, which is what we are trying to do, some of us. It'll be a cross between South Africa and a sort of Muslim Nigerian state. South Africa, it's because of the rural nature of South Africa and Ireland's rural nature. We have a large population living in very isolated farms, and a lot of them are elderly people, and they won't be able to protect themselves. So I think this is going to happen. This is my biggest fear. It's terrifying. It is a terrifying fear that the farmers of Ireland will have their land seized. There's no doubt that the dominant migrant force is Islamic, and it's radical. It seems to be very radical. And it's happened because the Irish are so sort of welcoming and hospitable. Nobody has batted an eyelid about this. And then there's been intense indoctrination of cultural Marxism. So that is a lethal cocktail. And the LGBT mob here, which they are a mob, they disgrace themselves every day. They love Islam. I wonder why. I have my own reasons, but I'm not going to say it. But we all know where LGBT plus is leading. And it seems to be leading into a very sordid place. And we know that there's certain beliefs within Islam that are maybe compatible with the LGBT agenda. So even though these people would throw some of the LGBT people off the top of a building, why is it that the LGBT crew stay so quiet on Islam?
Yeah, that could be a whole other tributary off the main river, the odd bedfellow relationship between gay activists and militant Muslims. I heard a priest once say that World War III will be fought between gay activists and Muslims. That, Conservatives will have already taken themselves out of the game. Gemma, how much of Ireland's problems, how many of Ireland's problems could be solved in a generation or two by A, stop having sterilized sex and have large families, and B, make disciples?
Well, yeah, I think Ireland's problems could be solved so easily. So easily. That's why I've decided to enter into politics, and I ran for the European elections. I didn't get elected because I didn't get any access to the mainstream media, but I'm absolutely adamant that they can be solved very easily. We have to leave the European Union. We have to take control of our credit supply again. We have to bring back our own currency, the punt. We have to deal with mass uncontrolled immigration. The vast majority of immigrants here are here illegally. Asylum seekers I'm speaking about, because we have a thing called the Dublin Convention, Patrick, which states that they have to seek asylum in the first port of arrival into Europe, which is rarely Dublin because we don't have many international flights. So they say that something like 90% of asylum claims are bogus, and then our government is having regular ceremonies to dole out citizenship to any Tom, Dick and Harry. These are all illegal. I'm convinced they have no authority to be selling our citizenship. So when we deal with all of that, and unfortunately these great people who are doing all of the slave labour now, they will have to be repatriated to the first port of call in Europe or back to their home country. And we're heading into a massive recession again, and that will put manners on. That'll bring people back to the things that are important, because the materialism has failed them time and time again. I think it will bring them back to their Christian faith.
Tell our listeners, if you could, Gemma, what has to happen before you get sort of certified, before you can run for office, whether it's the EU position you were going for. Did you also did you stand for TSIC, Prime Minister?
No, I stood for, well, this was probably an act of insanity in my part, but I was, most of my work is about anti-corruption, most of it. And, and it is very, very sad, but we are so much more corrupt than any other state in Europe. Because it's all, the elite is very tiny here, and they've had control since the foundation of the state. The state was taken over after the British left by fake patriots. And so we've had 100 years of that nonsense. So, it's all about vested interest and who you know, and that's how this country runs. So last summer there was a presidential election, which is they're the head of state, but it's a ceremonial position. But they're also the guardian of the Constitution. So I sought a nomination, but in order to get a nomination, you have to go through all the local councils, and I was only nominated by very limited numbers. I wasn't able to get. They wouldn't hear of what. As soon as I mentioned corruption, as soon as I mentioned globalism, that the country is no longer recognizable. It's just McDonald's, Starbucks. We can produce Irish businesses. Why are we inviting all of these American businesses in? It's ridiculous. American tourists don't want to come to Ireland and see Starbucks and McDonald's everywhere. But I was just shouted down for having those views, so I didn't get the nomination.
So you're not even permitted into the wings, let alone onto the stage to debate. No, but I'm running for our parliamentary elections, which are coming up in the next year, and there's a strong possibility our voting system is rigged. There's 500,000 people on the electoral register in Ireland who shouldn't be on it, and we have a population of about 4.5 million, so that's a lot of people who shouldn't be on it. So that is a lot. I think maybe things have to get, I hate to say this, but maybe much worse before people have the red pill experience where they're willing to say enough is enough. This has to be solved culturally and politically through legal means, and you can't. I'm sure you feel hobbled every day, Gemma, because the corruption is not just among politicians. You mentioned the police corruption that you have uncovered. Tell, for folks outside of Ireland, what is the Garda and how does that system work?
Yes, so we have a police force that is very, very political. It's all of the senior management of Garda Síochána, which means the guardians of the peace. They're all political appointments. So, in recent years, increasingly, they have become just the police force, the private police force of the political elite and the business elite and the media, and they're all embedded with each other. It's not very different to, I think your police obviously are a bit more independent over there. We don't have any separate intelligence service. We just have one police force. So about 10 years ago, I became embroiled in a case of a priest who had been murdered back in the 1980s. And he was murdered in a mansion in a remote part of Ireland, out in the countryside. And his murder had been effectively covered up. So I started to dig into that, and it was eventually described in our parliament when I presented the findings of my investigation. It was described as the biggest cover-up in the history of the state. It had all of the ingredients: the judiciary, Catholic Church, the police, the health service, you name it, they were involved in the murder of this priest who was brutally murdered, basically to do with money and land. So the police do what they're told, and sadly, they have been corrupted profoundly. I've been, since YouTube shut down my channel, we've been down at Google. I said, really, there's nothing more I can do except bring it to their doors.
Yeah.
And so we have been down there for nearly 3 weeks every day, and it's a new sort of speaker's corner. It's a patriotic movement that is growing, but the police are there every day, and they're in complete cahoots with Google. They go in and have their tea, their dinner in Google, and it's pathetic to see it. It's pathetic.
One thing I didn't touch on, maybe I can ask you now. Did they say that you uttered the C word? Was that the driving motive for taking down your channels? That I saw your hilarious apology, by the way. That the word was Catholic in the title. What was the linguistic mortal sin you committed?
Yeah, I did use the C word. I did, and in the title I used the destruction of Catholic statues in Ireland. But I also said, and how the media protect migrant criminals, which they do all over Europe, America, they do that. So they give a different, it's all downplayed. We've had an appalling case here recently, absolutely appalling. The country is in shock over it. 3 14-year-olds were sexually assaulted in a gang rape in a beautiful seaside resort, magnificent place down in the south of the country. And so the word on the ground, there had been an asylum seeker, in inverted commas, direct provision centre in that seaside resort. They put these they're not refugees, these people, most of them, but they put them in tourist locations for some reason. And there had been a bit of controversy about that particular centre, and then these children were allegedly sexually assaulted. So there was a concern, maybe it was non-nationals who were involved. We have no proof. But the police have now said that the alleged offenders, have fled the country. They have fled the country. So we don't know how true this is, but the bottom line is that we're not allowed to discuss crimes committed by migrants. They must be treated completely different to crimes committed by Irish people. So I had been discussing that, and that video was taken down. But yeah, I think the word Catholic triggered them.
I'm going to put a link in the show notes at patrickcoffin.media, if this is the first time you're listening to the show, of recorded conversation placed by you, Gemma, to the police, asking for a description of the perpetrators. And it's the classic, got to go to the sergeant for that, click. Oh, so sorry, I can't really discuss this. And they want to know who this is and so on. If the perpetrator was an Irishman who had an orange hat or a big nose, that would be all over the news because they want to catch the guy, right? Why the silence about the appearance of these perpetrators? Is that the same event, by the way, or am I conflating two different things? No,
well done, Patrick. Yeah. You've done your research. Fair play to you. Yeah, no, it is the same event because there was outrage that These were a gang, alleged sexual offenders who had, targeted 3 little girls who were enjoying their summer holidays at the beach. Appalling. So there was, we were all waiting for a description, please, because these people are on the loose in our country and every child is in danger. So can we please have a description? That's what would normally happen. And there was none. Silence. And this often happens when migrants are responsible. This often happens. There's no description given. Usually, the man was fair-haired or fair or and had a Dublin accent or a Cork accent.
Yeah, he was short, he was tall.
Yeah, that's the norm. But no. So they tried to tell me that no, they don't give descriptions. But I look, and then they hang up on you, and you can't get answers. I mean, this has happened to me a few times, and then the whole case just goes quiet. But they're being so foolish in this case because they're saying that the perpetrators have fled the country. So I'm asking them, well, if you know that they have fled the country, where have they gone to? So there's no answers. The media won't touch it. They're all terrified. And we are left like fools, and children are in danger. I mean, this country was always, no matter what, we were not in the south affected by what was going on in the north. We weren't. And I had a very safe childhood. The streets were safe. In rural Ireland, people could leave their doors open overnight, 24/7, and it was a safe country. Now it is a very dangerous country. It's just becoming like the UK, stabbings and murders it seems like every day. And it's devastating because we should be a very safe country.
Gemma, over your right shoulder, so on the screen, there's a poster of your documentary on the little girl, Mary Doyle, right? Mary Boyle? Mary Boyle. So this is the longest running cold case of a missing person, 1977. That's a lot of years. And so you took the time to produce this documentary, Mary Boyle, The Untold Story. Why is the word censored bedecking the top part of your poster?
Well, because Google got a spurious complaint. I think we discussed this before the show. I think that they got a spurious complaint from, this is a massive cover-up, and it's a cover-up involving her family, the police, and a political party called Fianna Fáil, who've been in and out of government for the last 90 years since our independence. And I started to investigate this case in 2015, 2016. And I spent some time up in the location, very, very remote. This was the farmhouse where she was staying, her grandparents' farmhouse. And it's in the most remote place. People can still watch my documentary. It's gone from YouTube, although I think people have put it back up on YouTube on other channels. But it is called Mary Boyle, The Untold Story. And you will see I start off with drone footage of the location, and you will see that it is extremely remote. And she went for a walk with her uncle and was never seen again. Now, her uncle is a suspect, and he was a member of this political party as well. So the first 2 officers on the scene agreed to do interviews with me, and they were fairly decent police officers. They are now in their 80s, but they agreed to do interviews, and in their interviews they told me that a local politician, a member of Fianna Fáil, had ordered them not to consider the suspect, not to interview and not to arrest him, and not to consider any member of the family a suspect. And so they said that on camera, and they said that they had no doubt that this phone call played a role, and it's quite clear that it did, because the chief suspect was never arrested and he's still rambling around the countryside up there. So my documentary led to the reopening of the case, because there was uproar when I published it. There were protests on the streets, there were marches for justice, and everyone was sickened that a child's murder could be covered up in this way. One phone call. from a politician. But this is much deeper. It goes much deeper, this case, because Lord Mountbatten, who was the Queen of England's, Queen Elizabeth's favourite cousin, he had a castle very near here in County Sligo, and he too was a notorious paedophile. And it's my belief that there was a very elaborate paedophile ring in operation up there, and this man could have brought down many others. Actually, Lord Mountbatten introduced Jimmy Savile to the British royal family. So Jimmy Savile used to come here to Ireland quite a lot. You know, the BBC
presenter, mega pedophile.
Mega pedophile. Yeah, up there with Jeffrey Epstein. And so anyway, a spurious copyright complaint went in about the picture of the child, which I had permission to use, and it was given to me by the one family member that has stood fairly strong. This girl was an identical twin, so her identical twin has tried her best to stay on the side of truth, but she's under a lot of pressure. So Google told me to remove it. They told me to remove it, and it's just appalling. I mean, they're covering up paedophilia.
And people think that only Catholic institutions are guilty of this. All of this is very, very similar sounding pattern of corruption and denial. And the denial here has nothing to do with conservative versus liberal. Totally different categories, correct?
No, totally. I mean, look, it's about good versus evil. That's it. And, YouTube have plenty of channels up promoting paedophilia, promoting child sexual abuse, and yet they remove a channel which is mainly devoted to exposing this sickness, which is destroying the lives of so many people, but they chose to remove mine. I mean, look, I've spent a lot of time down at their headquarters over the last few weeks, and it's so sad. You know, we call it the creche. It's a kindergarten in there. You know, they are allowed to have naps. They can have a little sleep in the afternoon. They get free massages. They can go to a safe space if they're feeling a bit triggered, if they're transitioning, if they're changing gender and they're maybe a bit triggered, they can go to a safe space within the company. They can bring their dogs. Patrick, I've been watching dogs going into that office, and the dogs are reluctant. They don't want to be in an office, and they're dragged in. It's sickening. I mean, the whole thing, it's a cesspit of corruption, and it's a cult. Google is a cult. I've had the misfortune of watching hundreds of people, and they mainly employ foreigners down there. They don't really employ Irish people. It seems to be about 80 to 90% foreigners. So we don't want American companies coming in here and not creating Irish jobs. The whole idea is they create jobs for Irish people. But except that if you go from an independent sovereign nation to an American enclave or a colony, this is the kind of thing you become. You mentioned earlier a debt slave, and now there's a phrase from, I think it's from E. Michael Jones's book Libido Dominandi, that certain populations over time become they internalize the commandments of their oppressors, and so you have this Stockholm syndrome. Like, for instance, some of the family members of the missing girl, that they're so cowed and mau by the corruption, they're afraid to speak up even when a life is lost. Does that make sense? Completely. I mean, we have this. Stockholm syndrome. They're trauma bonded. I think narcissistic personality disorder is. It's a lot to do with trauma bonding people, and the public here are subjected to constant gaslighting by the government. They're told, no, the country's in great shape, and it's perfectly normal that the Irish would become a minority. Our Prime Minister, Taoiseach, recently said that migrants work harder than Irish people. They come out with these statements. Yeah. People are, what? This is crazy. But people are slowly going crazy with it, and they're trauma bonded to their masters, that they're so used to being treated like dirt, they don't expect anything else. And it's absolutely devastating to see how downtrodden Irish people are. But it is I'm sure, to do with the colonial 800 years of. And, it's in the 1840s, we suffered our own Holocaust, but they chose to call it the Great Famine. But it was a Holocaust. We lost 1 million people to starvation, and another 1 million people left, mainly for the States. And, we had a genocide here, but we don't call it that. It's called the Great Famine. We're in such denial. We're so messed up as a people.
That's interesting.
It's so tragic.
The Great Famine. That's a good book title. It's, rich irony.
Rich irony. And but one thing that gives me great hope, Patrick, sorry for speaking so much, but
no, it's okay. It's better than the opposite problem of one-word answers. Go ahead, Gemma.
Yeah, well, I will let you get a word in now, but I'm so grateful to all the Irish Americans who've contacted me recently to say that they are horrified about what is happening here, and they want to do whatever they can to help, because I actually feel many of them are more patriotic to Ireland than we are here.
Yeah, I wonder if they regret emigration decisions once in a while. I mean, you're holding a very large bag there, Gemma. You're sort of, there's a lot of David Goliath dynamic here. Can I ask you about Leo Varadkar, your Taoiseach Prime Minister? Am I pronouncing it correctly? Taoiseach?
Taoiseach.
Taoiseach. Sorry, Taoiseach. Right.
It means chief in Irish.
Chief in Irish.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. I remember reading a bit of his background on the campaign promises and his identity as pro-life as recently as, I believe, 2015. He reminds me of Pete Buttigieg, the gay mayor of South Bend, Indiana, running for president of the United States. Another mendacious character who hid who he was until after he started winning elections. His campaign, along with the campaign to redefine marriage, which I think was passed by I want to say 63% of Irish voters who voted in the referendum. Is that true?
Yeah, I'm not sure of the exact figure, but it was fair, indoctrinated.
Right, and the reason why this is more devastating than the 2015 Obergefell versus Hodges decision, which redefined marriage in America, is that was one or two unelected black-robed attorneys called Supreme Court justices. The Irish vote was Irish voters. And I have a theory, you can confirm or deny it, that the people within Ireland who did not want marriage redefined as it's been defined for millennia inside and outside the Christian church were outgunned and outfinanced from sources outside of Ireland. Is that accurate?
Well, the main source being George Soros. Mm-hmm. He's everywhere. He's infiltrated so many NGOs in this country. And and those entities that were trying to preserve traditional marriage and the pro-life ethos of Ireland, they did not get a look in. Mm-hmm. I know Mark Zuckerberg recently was quoted as saying that when they were asked to run pro-life ads from the States, I think, for the referendum here, for the abortion referendum here, they asked the government, Facebook asked the government, what did they think? And the government said, oh, well, you decide, And they said, no, we weren't going to run these ads.
That's astounding. Imagine Jeff Zuckerberg calling up Donald Trump to ask permission.
I know.
For anything.
Yeah. No, well, look, the relationships are so close. And, Google is taking over a certain part of Dublin. And as I say, we spent a lot of time down there recently. They virtually have a whole street of buildings, and we are very low. We're not a low rise in Dublin. It's nice Georgian architecture. We wish it wasn't Georgian, British, but it is. But it's a beautiful city. Now we have these big tech, American, Google, Twitter, Facebook, headquartering here, and they're building these monstrosities that are completely out of keeping. I've gone completely off point there. Sorry. But it's they are calling the shots. It's a corporatocracy. They tell the government what to do.
Architecture is not really off topic, I don't think. A building is it's a symbol of permanence and industry and home life. And if your culture is falling apart, and if you're living a life stained by a bad conscience, and you want to normalize all manner of perversions, that's going to have an effect on the shape of your buildings. I'm sort of fascinated by the shape of buildings and how they've changed after World War II, and I'm sure Irish buildings that have been built in the last 5 or 10 years are more boxy, more Bauhaus, more purely functional, no ornamentation. Do you find that the sort of corporatization of the shape of public buildings in cities and towns?
Every single day down in Google, we're talking about that. You know, we've got a good sound system, and you know, we're saying to people, look at what they've built, just these Soviet blocks, communist blocks, and we're supposed to look at them and say, oh, we're so modern, it's wonderful, we're like America now. You know, we've got these big buildings just plonked in the middle of a Georgian city. And they just see it as so cool, and they just don't realise how beautiful Dublin used to be. But it's being ripped down, cranes all over, tearing out the architecture that made Dublin such a beautiful city. Mm-hmm. It's becoming like New York, and I love New York, and I absolutely adore America. But it's not Europe. It's that's what makes the world so wonderful. That,
sure.
We're a bit older over here, and we've got older architecture, and it's so sad. But in terms of the degradation of American cities, liberal American cities, that's what Dublin is going through now. Mm-hmm. Graffiti everywhere. It's down at heel. It's degenerate. It's turning into a bit of a slum. That's
a nice segue to the...
Your viewers are going to be so uplifted after this.
Well, it's better a true uncertainty than a false certainty. You have to see things as they are before you can sort of attack the disease. Yeah. Let me see, anti-corruptionireland.com. If people go there, I'm also going to put that in the show link. What kind of links and what's the content there at Gemma?
Yeah, well, I decided to set up a new organisation back in February, which has 20 core pillars for change. They're very, very simple, straightforward things, but it's called Anti-Corruption Ireland, and it's all about that we must have accountability, transparency. Every week we have a new scandal in which taxpayers' money is going down the drain, and this always costs the taxpayer a fortune. So it's about that politicians will have to be held accountable. They will have to go to prison when they abuse rights, when they squander taxes, and that there will have to be a complete overhaul of the institutions of the state, that the police and judiciary will no longer be politically appointed. Also, we're very much taking on the George Soroses of this world, that George Soros will be banned if I have anything to do with it from Ireland. These NGOs that are corrupting the country, 5G, water fluoridation, wind turbines, everything, all of the ingredients of the globalist ideology, cultural Marxist, LGBT propaganda in schools, all of that is going.
Do you think
we are going to succeed? I know we are, because the Irish people are reaching a point where they say, no way, this is ridiculous.
You detect the presence of a silent majority that are with you but don't want to put their head above the trench?
Yeah. There's a real fear. If they get involved, if they question what's going on, they're called fascist, racist, neo-Nazis. So we're sort of saying, would you rather be hacked to death than be called a racist? You're not a racist. Nobody is racist in this country. And, to say that we're a racist people is it's a nonsense. We don't want to become a minority in our own country. So I think people are becoming braver because they see people like me, and we're saying, they know we're not racist. So I think a bit like with what's happening with President Trump, more and more people are coming out and being proud to be associated with his presidency. And it's the same in the UK. People who were against Brexit are now for it because they've seen how undemocratic it was, that they voted to leave and then they weren't allowed to leave, and Remainers are now turning over to. So it's fantastic time to be alive anyway.
I don't know about you, but I did the same jaw drop when I saw the Brexit vote results as I did when the president of the United States was a guy called Donald J. Trump. I thought they were kind of parallel phenomena where people who may give one answer to a pollster, they're not going to necessarily agree when the only poll in place is happening, namely the election poll.
Yeah, no, I know. I mean, it's the transition has been, it's incredible. And we see what's happening in Italy with Salvini. He's like President Trump. He is adored. I know President Trump has his enemies in the media and the liberals, but Salvini he loves his people and his people love him. And it's great to see that. You know, he's not a fascist. He's a proud Italian patriot. I see him as leading the new renaissance that hopefully will save Europe when we get rid of Macron and Merkel. But yeah, no, it's, you know, we sort of, those of us who are regenerating the patriot movement in Ireland, you know, we just hope and pray that soon President Trump will put his eyes over Ireland and see how these rogue big tech companies have come here. They're abusing our constitutional rights to free speech. They're abusing our taxes, and they're behaving like, you know, as I say, gangsters. And I just hope, I wake up every day and say, please, President Trump, put some manners on these companies that should be paying their taxes in America. And please take them home, please, because we don't want them here. They're not good. They're unethical. They're immoral. Take them home. So maybe he will. As I said recently, you know, if they don't like the laws of this country, they can go back to America.
What drives you, Gemma? Because there are many people in Ireland who are similarly concerned with what's happened, and some are willing to write a letter to the editor or maybe run for local office. But you're like a supercharged I'm not sure if they have these commercials in Ireland, but the ever-ready battery bunny, right? Doesn't matter, knock it over, it's still going to go forward. You have an enormous amount of grit and drive. Have you always been that way?
I probably have been in a way. I think, I always questioned authority. And I'm a horsewoman. And horses make you very tough, especially if you're female. They make you very strong because you get lots of knocks with horses. So, but I'm also in my faith, and my faith is the most important thing to me. I hate the fact that Catholicism has been so, it's been subjected to so much injustice in this country when it has been responsible for so much good. And I'm not talking about the hierarchy who are corrupt. And many of the priests in this country will not speak out in the way that Jesus would want them to. But I have everything to be grateful to Catholicism for. And my faith, I grew up with really good parents who were really lovely in their faith. They didn't force it upon us. But I know the main tenets of Christianity are about standing up for justice, truth. That's what Jesus wanted. You know, he stood up against the bankers. He stood up against those charging interest. He stood up for the poor and for the underdog. And if a journalist can't do that, you know, I don't know who will. So, and I keep being kicked, and I think, you know, it's so true. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. When they kick me, they just make me more determined. Yeah,
and if you're bearing a camera during the kicking, if you can't fix it, you can feature it. That's another way to draw attention to what's going on. So that it's almost win-win. Even apparent failures can be very quickly turned into victories just by disclosing things and letting your hair down and just telling the truth.
Completely. And I mean, I've learned so much about the true meaning of Christianity. I was not as deep in my faith as I should have been, as I am now. And I'm like, goodness, I'm a really flawed Christian. But, you know, I understand that the cross is the symbol of our faith for a reason, because you can't live without taking the knocks, without the suffering. You're not living a full life, because you can't appreciate the day and the good and the light without being in the dark, and seeing the dark and facing evil and taking on evil and saying, you know, and it's so fulfilling. You know, the Christian life, if you're really living it, is so fulfilling. It takes you away from all of the distractions that they want you to be caught up in, the materialism, the physical. But it is very sad that so many people have lost that, and they're looking for meaning in the gym and, you know, in yoga classes, and they can't find it. You know, if only they knew it's there. It's there for the taking. But our country is so Catholic still. You know, they can't take the architecture they might try, but, you know, all around our country we have beautiful grottos to Our Lady, and we've beautiful churches which are still beautifully kept, and we are so lucky, and they're empty a lot of the time. I'm saying to people, go and say a prayer, light a candle, be on your own with God, stay away from these globalist shopping malls, and see what happens. You know, it's there for the taking. We have it. It's all built. Our ancestors gave it to us.
One of my mentors in life, my spiritual father, Bishop, now soon to be blessed, Fulton Sheen, is Irish on one side of his family. And he famously was talking about people that you just mentioned. Something like millions of people devote thousands of dollars to beautify faces that will soon be the prey of worms. Kind of distills it into one little knockout image there, just about the brevity of life. You know, I lost my father a year and a half ago, and I know you're a widow, Gemma, and when you lose someone very close to you, you have a new interior awareness of the brevity of life, and that can be a tremendous grace and the installation of courage. Does that make sense?
Very much so. Very much so. Because when you get through something that you don't think is going to happen, and it's sudden, and the loss of somebody you love deeply, then you sort of feel you can get through anything, and it does. Yeah, I mean, that's a very recent loss for you, Patrick, but I've no doubt he's smiling down at you from heaven, and you know, we know that we're all going to be reunited again, and this is a very temporary visit to this earth, and you know, as Christians we are supposed to believe that death is the high point of life. And that's what I feel. I don't fear anything. And that's thanks to my Christian faith.
That was going to be my next question. We talked off the air about Ronnie Guerin, the journalist, now lauded justly in many parts of Ireland, who was killed for similarly exposing corruption. But it sounds like your gloves are off and you're looking forward, not to the side. Does that make sense? Are you... Has it crossed your mind how the kooky far left will react against you? Are you ever nervous about what form that pushback might come in?
No, I'm not nervous. I'm ready. You know, I'm ready that at any minute one of them, because they're very deranged and there's a lot of incitement against me, calling me racist and all of this. So there's a lot of that. I get death threats on Twitter. My lawyers are currently examining taking a case against Twitter as co-conspirators to incite murder, because they refused to remove death threats against me, and I had to go down to their headquarters, and the head of Twitter in Ireland is former head of our police communications unit, so she's deep state. And I informed the security there. Of course, no management will come down, but I informed them a few weeks ago that they were publishing death threats against me and they had to be removed, but they wouldn't remove them. They finally did remove some of them in the last few days when we told them that this was going to be a criminal case and that they were potentially co-conspirators to incite murder against me. But as I say, if it's God's will, whatever his plan is for me, I'm not afraid of dying. They're more than capable of killing me. They've tried to silence me every other way. They took my job from me. They took my reputation. They took my YouTube channel. When I go out onto the streets now, they haven't. I've been sort of messed around. I haven't been physically assaulted per se, but I've been pushed as police watch, look on.
That's assault right there. That's assault, pushing.
That's assault. Yeah, no, it is. But I'm not frightened, and I have, the visibility now is good because, anything happens to me, Patrick, everyone will say, oh, well, she was, that we know who that was. We know it was the powers that be had to silence her. So I think they have to be a bit careful in that regard. No matter, even if I die in an accident, people will say she was murdered.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, that's right. You mentioned Andy No, I believe. This is an interesting test of how the elites and oligarchs consider who's a worthy victim and who's not. Andy No, the openly homosexual anti-Antifa crusader, was milkshaked and punched and cold-cocked in public in Portland, Oregon, while the police were given stand-down orders. They did nothing to intervene. He was put in the hospital. I'm looking to interview his attorney, Harmeet Dillon, who's vowed to sue Antifa into the ground, which is another skirmish in that war, isn't it? The legal battle.
It
also
is,
important.
Yeah, and I mean, Antifa don't have much of a support base here. They're not very mobilised, but they were brought to Ireland by a state paedophile. He worked in government here, and he was caught with more than 5,000 child sexual abuse images, and he was convicted and he walked from court. He was also very involved in the pro-abortion campaign. And he brought Antifa to Ireland, but they're very weak. They haven't really mobilised. I'm not sure they may yet because Soros is so involved. But yeah, the legal battles, we're currently looking at taking on Google for dismantling my channel. We're definitely suing Twitter. And, but you don't want to get too caught up in legal battles either. Well, I'm really impressed by Tulsi Gabbard and her action against YouTube. That seems to be, and then there's a big union, of course, in Germany with 2 million members that has given Google, YouTube a month to respond to the silencing of conservative voices, and they're going to sue Google as well. So there's a lot happening. And then the whistleblower, of course, Project Veritas. And doing phenomenal work.
Yes, my friend David Daleiden, the Center for Medical Progress, infiltrating conversations in which they're sipping wine and negotiating dead baby body parts. And that's a function of new media, isn't it? This is the power of the digital revolution, is that you don't have to go to an editor, cap in hand. You can, as long as you have a phone and a modem connection, you can live stream to the world, which is why your work's all the more important to at least get heard. Okay, so you listen to Gemma O'Doherty and you don't agree. Okay, well, at least you had a chance to hear her side. And it's all one-sided. I've never heard of a far-left channel being removed by Google / YouTube. Have you?
No, absolutely not. And it's very obvious. And I mean, we're such a threat because we're Christians? When did that become a thing? When did Christians become such a threat to anyone? So no, I just hope, I really do hope that President Trump acts in whatever capacity he can to put manners on these companies that are just ruining. They're ruining life for everyone. They're destabilizing countries. They're interfering in elections, as we know. They interfered in our abortion referendum here. And they're making life a misery. And sooner or later, the administration in Washington is going to have to do something. And it's going to have to be sooner. I really, it's frustrating that there hasn't been more. Why do you think, Patrick, there hasn't been more action from the administration on this?
This being the Irish context?
Well, no, just the misbehavior of Google, Twitter and Facebook. Why is it that they're allowed to get away with all this conservative censorship?
Well, I think it's a new problem. It's not like CBS and NBC with their suited executives who can be called to task because they're an identifiable army. big tech companies, they're always gobbling each other up. The structural flow chart of reporting and ownership is changing all the time. One will buy the other. It's sort of like trying to nail Jello to the wall, or trying to pin down mercury. And it's digital. It's once an image goes out onto the internet, it's hard to control it. It's hard to it's like you'll end up playing an endless game of whack-a-mole. Trying to. So I think the nature of the media platforms themselves don't lend themselves to easy management. I think that helps explain why government action against censorship that you're facing goes so slowly. I could be wrong.
Yeah, well, they say they're platforms, but they're clearly publishers, because
yeah, sure.
Like that argument it's nonsensical, because they are monitoring what people like you and I say, so therefore they are editorializing. They
sure.
are biased, and they've had whistleblowers coming out to say that they're biased. We all know they're biased, so they're not neutral platforms anymore. If they are neutral, reinstate my channel. Stop censoring you. Stop threatening other, conservative Christian voices.
Yeah. In the meantime, we're recording this in early August 2019, so some of this might not quite be as evergreen, but I love your literally taking it to the streets. You're fighting big tech and arcane internet-based technology, and you're fighting it with a bullhorn. It's just it's counterintuitive, but yes, it's best of the old meets best of the new.
Yeah, and it's the last thing I want to do. I mean, I'm not a natural protester. I don't want to be standing out on the streets, but where else can we speak? That's the only place now that we can speak, because they've taken everything else from us, and we are lucky. The rest of Europe doesn't really have a physical presence of these companies, but they are here in Dublin, and they're just down the road from me. So we're causing them an absolute nightmare. We go down every day. We have great speakers. We have our Irish drums, the barons, out, so they can't get any work done. And we play Irish music very loudly, because we still, believe it or not, in this communist state, have the right to protest. I keep saying to my colleagues who come, we get 30, 40 people most days. On Saturdays we get 100 plus. But I keep saying, in a couple of years we will be swept up into police vans. We won't be allowed to protest anymore. That's what is coming, unless we now say sorry, no. And so every day they've got 20, 30 security out. That's great, because it's costing them a fortune to police our very peaceful event. We're very peaceful, obviously. And we, speak about Irish culture, and we read our proclamation out, the Proclamation of the Irish Republic, and we read out our Constitution, and it's a wonderful event. So, but it's driving them crazy, which is great.
There's so much to, wow, how do I follow up all of that? Let me ask you about former colleagues. Have anyone sort of come to you under the cover of night in your former writing situations where you were removed from the Death Star, and maybe you've inspired other journalists who are still doing so-called mainstream journalism, who think and feel as you do, but just don't want to lose their jobs over it? Are there like-minded people inside where you used to live? The Irish Times, right?
Irish Independent.
Excuse me.
They're
Irish Independent, yes.
They're one and the same. No, the only thing they do in the middle of the night is stab me in the back on Twitter. No, not one. Not one. And I would be surprised. You see, they're all financially controlled, and they're puppets of government. They're puppets of big tech, big pharma. Even the last one that I wrote for, which was a current affairs magazine, which is sort of half decent. It was called Village, and I had been writing last year for it, and I'd given them some very good stories which boosted their circulation, including a massive child abuse scandal in a private school in Dublin. which led to it's had a lot of success, that investigation. But even the editor of that last night was out. He was under pressure because we had a vindication in the courts recently. I did, in relation to this case, and it was a vindication in that we managed to get somebody before the courts. He is still innocent. I want to stress that. Mm-hmm. But it was, years and years and years of waiting for this person to face the court. So I had written up that investigation, and it led to this person being brought before the courts. And this magazine, yesterday or the day before, said this was thanks to our investigation, written by Gemma O'Doherty. And of course, the Twitter trolls were out on top of him. And I said to myself, it's only a matter of time before he distances himself from me. And sure enough, he put out a tweet saying that he does not agree at all with my politics. So I have said, if you're against my politics, then you are pro-corruption, you're pro the dissolution of the Irish state and Irish national sovereignty, you're pro the Irish becoming a minority, you're pro paedophilia, because there I stand up against all of those things. So anyone who's against me is for corruption. It's
astounding to watch people say out loud what millions think privately, and then when the Twitter mob arrives, they instantly buckle and issue a supine apology. Just happened recently here in America with a guy called Mario Lopez, who's sort of a celebrity gossip guy. He used to be on a TV show called Saved by the Bell. And he told Candace Owens on her podcast that he didn't think it was necessarily a good idea for 3-year-olds to decide their sex/gender. And for his, being guilty of common sense, he was threatened, by his bosses with the loss of his career, instantly backed down. I was rude, I was insensitive. You have some priests and bishops doing the same thing. They say something that's so heartening, it's so inspiring, and gets you up to imitate them. And then with the first blast of wind, they fold.
Oh, it's sickening. But it shows the levels of cowardice that are out there, especially among, the very people, the politicians, the journalists, the people who are supposed to be, people of integrity and concerned about the public interest, but they just fold like that. I don't know, they just don't seem to have any backbone or spine or sense of, no, that's wrong. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to say something I don't believe. But we, the sheeple, as we call them. The
sheeple, yeah. Yes. Yeah. I like that, yeah.
Yeah, it's a liberal disease. They're so terrified of being in any way challenged, because they're afraid to speak their own mind and have their own independent thoughts. They just have to go with the herd.
Sometimes they're, to gently pick on a couple of bishops' examples, they seem comfortable virtue signaling or sounding like the editorial board of the New York Times would applaud them, but it's rare, and it only happens when it seems like they want to cast some positive regard upon themselves. I'm thinking of when the abortion referendum passed in favor of the pro-abortion side, I remember, I think it's Archbishop Eamon Martin, I forget, who's no relation to Dermot Martin of Dublin, right? That's a different family. He was saying that he hopes abortion will be safe, legal, and rare. And I thought it was I had to rewind the tape. What? Safe, legal, and rare? Would you? I wanted to ask him, would you say the same thing about slavery? Or the Archbishop of Dublin telling the press that he didn't want to tell Irish people how to vote. Well, if they were voting for some racist, egregious violation of human rights, it would have been an issue from the pulpit. But when it comes to protecting innocent human life of Ireland's most precious resource, namely the Irish, silence or waffling. Am I misreading the cards here? Because that, as a consumer across the pond, that's how I've observed it.
It's absolutely sickening. They should be stripped of their robes and thrown out of the country if I had my way. They are traitors to the man that they are supposed to be loyal to and whose word is the truth. But, I remember at Easter Sunday Mass in my own church this year, our parish priest stood on the altar and he said, abortion, LGBT, there's no right or wrong. There's no yes or no. This was on Easter, the Easter Mass.
Wow.
I don't know how I actually stayed in the church, but we get this every week, and it's climate change nonstop.
Yep.
And then, 1 minute we're arguing, that we have to keep our environmental footprint at an absolute minimum. But then the next prayer is for all the refugees and migrants to come in, and we're hospitable. So which is it? It's just it's relentless. But you see the dumbing down. Like I was looking, last week at Mass, I was, one of the ministers for the Eucharist. She was dressed as if she was going to the beach. She had flip-flops on, shorts, and a local, and you just think the whole thing is just so wrong. And there's a place for modesty, and when you're standing on the altar, of course, that's where Pat, obviously you're an expert in this, I'm not, but they shouldn't be standing on the altar in the first place.
Yeah, this is something I cover a fair amount, the issue of liturgical abuse and what it's a symbol of, a deeper symbol of just ignorance, not just what they don't know, but what they really should know but don't want to hear. And of course, modesty and all those issues flow from that basic ignorance of Christ and Scripture, and what the reason why we exist is to become saints. I just spoke at a magnificent camp for teens in Donnelly, Idaho, called Camp Apologeti, and I asked for a show of hands. I said, raise your hand if you think the population of heaven is 100% good people. And all the hands went up, and I said, actually, there are 0 good people in heaven. There are only saints in heaven. But if you don't know that, if you don't know that's why God made you, then you're going to be confused about things like, what's a good thing to wear at Mass, and so on. So it's all organically tied. Speaking of organically, I noticed that the left are very it's very green, it's very, whether it's footprint or carbon emission gases, but the respect for the environment of the woman's body, no one cares when it comes to the cocktail of chemicals known as the birth control pill, or the killing of a baby inside the environment of the mother's womb. Definitely two standards there.
Oh, completely. My body, my choice. But when you say, well, hang on, there's a second body there. Is there? Oh, we hadn't thought of that. They can't win. Like, there's no argument that justifies doing this ever. So they can't win, but they're and I know as Christians we have to pray for them, but they are very, very unwell mentally. We see a lot of it. They're very, very damaged. Like, there's been some journalists in this country who spoke out about their abortions, and one in particular, she might be up very late at night tweeting about her abortions, and you just think, no, don't do that. That's just it's so wrong. You shouldn't be talking publicly about something so private, and you just see that they're very, very unwell, and that's what abortion does to women.
I do a weekly commentary for members of Coffin Nation, and I just covered it's an online TV series. I won't mention the producer because I don't want to give them attention, but the show itself is called Control Alt Delete, and it's a comedy set in an abortion clinic because abortion's so hilarious. But these two far left feminists they're giggling like zombies about how funny abortion is, and they wear a T-shirt sort of trumpeting it. That's the demonic part, because they're obviously protesting too much, right? Why don't they just do what they think is right and move on with life? They have to keep returning to the same act and reassuring themselves that there's no shame involved and that it's okay to joke about it or tweet in the middle of the night. It's hardened heart is the phrase that comes to mind.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was looking at a car beside me today in the traffic, and it had the repeal was the symbol of the abortion referendum to repeal the 8th Amendment, which protected the unborn. And, it was a love heart with the words repeal. And I just thought, just so sickening that they've stolen a love heart to advertise abortion.
Mm-hmm.
It's a culture of death, Patrick. It's the death culture.
I thought the Irish pro-lifers did as good a job as they could, with the love them both idea. They didn't come at it with dogma or Jesus or pointy hats or Catholicism, just reason and science, but just not enough support there. The culture itself there's been a sort of a terrible tilt.
The media were completely on board, and then they created this story about a lady who, the Indian lady, I'm not sure if you know about her, Savita Halapanava.
Mm-hmm. I did. I asked. Yes, I've talked about this with John Waters. Yeah. That's
right. Yeah. So that was a big hoax where this poor lady died, and she was pregnant, and it was hospital health service neglect, which is very common in Ireland because our health service is on its knees by design, not by accident. And so they blamed the abortion laws because they didn't notice that she had sepsis. And they sort of created a scenario whereby they said, that she died as a result of our abortion laws, which was completely wrong, because we have had the best maternal health care in the Western world. Mm-hmm. We're way up there. Not anymore, but because of our pro-life protection of the unborn. But where the mother's life was in danger, the mother's life was always saved, and that's not abortion, because you're not intentionally killing.
Correct. Yeah, that'd be direct intentional. Yeah.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Because probably the baby wouldn't have survived anyway if the mother wasn't going to. So that worked extremely well, and we excellent standards of maternal health care. But they claimed in the case of this lady that in fact it had been due to the law, which it wasn't. That's how they manipulated the electorate into voting, because they thought people are dying because of this law, and they weren't.
And then the movement needed a mascot or a symbol, and she's perfect. She's a woman and a visible minority. It's a perfect storm.
Oh, completely. I mean, a friend of mine told me how her little 5-year-old came home from school one day and said, Mommy, because a lady died because of the abortion laws. And she was like, no, but he had picked that up in school.
Sure. What's your next move? After the hope with, God willing, your channel will be rightly reinstated. You can continue to do live streams. Whether or not that happens politically, planning to run again? Different office, different auspices? Tell us more.
Yes. Planning to run for the national elections, the national parliament, the Dáil. So that'll hopefully it has to be held, I think, by April 21. So we will definitely have an election. We could have one in the run up to Brexit, or we could have one next summer. And that will be the third time I've put myself forward in recent months. I got 11,000 votes in the European elections, but I didn't get one interview on the mainstream, so a lot of people don't even know about my message. So we just have to keep raising the profile, raising the fact that there is an alternative now, and this Google thing has been great for that, because we're targeting a whole new audience down in Dublin, in the city, and so that's great, and more people are waking up. So the last thing I want to do, Patrick, is to be a politician. It kills me inside, but I've got to do it, because the country, I cannot stand by and watch my country go to hell. So that's the plan.
I wish more Irish men had your spine, Gemma. Maybe this will inspire them to come out from behind the shadows. And I suspect there's an Irish analog to the Brexit movement. People are privately fed up and may not want to go on the record with that. Is there a party that at the national level that more or less lines up with your goals?
Well, this is what Anti-Corruption Ireland is. We're registering it as a political party, but that's extremely difficult. Yeah, they don't want to register new parties. They make it incredibly difficult, but that is what it will be. There's another party called the National Party, which is registered. It took them 3 years. It took them a long time to get registered, but and it didn't take them 3 years to get registered. But they're 3 years in formation, and it did take them quite a while. But they're up and running, and we are pretty much singing off the same hymn sheet. We have great relations, and so I do hope that we'll be able to run as many candidates between us as possible. But it's going to be an uphill battle, because the media are against us, and but what's great about Ireland is that it's so small that basically we're going to be getting in our cars and just driving around the country and spread.
That's a huge advantage. Huge. Yeah, public meetings are irreplaceable, because it just concretizes it by meeting the people and having them see and hear you live. It's terrific. It is. Yeah. One last thing, because I want to honor that you're busy, and that is the pro-life vote, and in a way the gay marriage vote were hobbled, because if you were pro-life or conservative or wanted to have marriage redefined, or not redefined as it's been for millennia, then you were cast as the no side, right? So you're anti, as opposed to, well, you're not. I can tell from speaking with you just today, Gemma, that you are for a lot more than you're against. Does that make sense?
Completely.
Yeah.
Completely. Yeah. Yeah. No, that's what they've done. They're very well. They think they're clever, but I mean, it's they can't get away from the term pro-life. They hate that term. Yeah. They like us to be called anti-abortion, but that has not happened. We are, pro-life is the term for people who are pro-baby, as John Waters says, pro-baby. So right. They can't steal that from us. And look, I think if most people were to ask what does Gemma O'Doherty stand for, it would be she's really anti-corruption. So that's what I am.
Is that
the corruption womb or yeah?
Sorry, the signal cut out a little bit. What was the last sentence I missed?
Well, be corruption within the womb.
Yes, sure.
It's the corruption that has infested all strata of Irish life and society, and that so many of our people are opting for suicide now. There's a suicide epidemic in Ireland. People feel, and that's combined with the loss of faith, because people feel there's no meaning, there's no reason, there's no purpose to their lives.
Yeah, and combined with lack of jobs, and adds another layer of jet fuel to the despair. Yeah, and lack of never being able to buy their own home, having to live in an epoxy little capsule that most of us grew up in decent homes with gardens and 3 or 4 bedrooms, and that's an impossibility now for most young Irish people, which is insane. So it's tough. It's very tough for them. We want to give them a better life here in Ireland, and we can do that. We're a very rich country. Starting with the wealth known as Irish men and women. Exactly. Well, Gemma O'Doherty, it's been an honor talking to you. I really appreciate your time. I'm going to put all the links to things that we've mentioned from the anti-corruptionireland.com. I'm going to try to find the Mary Boyle documentary, and as well as your main.com, GemmaO'Doherty.com, and anything else I can think to add in there. Thankfully, all of my videos that were removed by YouTube are on BitChute. You're at BitChute? Okay. BitChute Gemma O'Doherty, but because they don't live stream, and I know you like live streaming too, Patrick, I only did live stream, so I'm finding BitChute a little bit tricky, so I'm currently working with designers who are going to allow me to live stream through my website, but all of my videos, including all of the band videos, are all on BitChute
Gemma O'Doherty. So they can, hopefully the Mary Boyle documentary is on that too. So I'm a bit at the moment, because they just removed everything in one click of a switch, you know, I'm still trying to recover the material, but thankfully it was all kept on a BitChute channel.
Okay, indeed. Well,
thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Gemma. Your punch back twice as hard attitude is very inspiring. It's outrageous that you've been banned and shunted and shamed and shellacked. So do keep in touch, and Godspeed with your efforts there with a good old-fashioned soapbox and bullhorn, which might just work from my lips to God's ears.
Well, hopefully it will. Hopefully it will. You know, we wish people in America would keep an eye. Every day I do lots of live streams from our Google protest and our speakers and all the noise we're causing down there. So I'd love for American people to see what we're doing, shaming these big tech companies. So you can tune into my Facebook. I'm still live on Facebook. But thank you so much for all your work, Patrick, everything you're doing to inform people about the New World Order and, you know, what's happening to Catholicism, and it's phenomenal work that you're doing.
Well, thank you. There's just there's just so much that me and others like me here and everywhere don't want to go on under our watch. So, but it's so freeing just to have your gloves off and just tell the truth and be who you are, come what may. I do want to note, if you're listening right now in Ireland or you have Irish friends or relatives, send the link to the show. I would like this to go as viral as possible inside Ireland, outside of the Google-only avenues, because arguments need to be heard and evaluated. If you can't hear them at all, then this is known as a police state. And I appreciate your work as well, Gemma. Godspeed.
God bless, Patrick.
All right.
Thank you very much.
This is the Patrick Coffin Show. Be a saint. What else is there? Hey, this is Patrick Coffin. If you like what you see and hear and you want to see and hear more, consider joining Coffin Nation as a full member. Just click right here and find out more about what that means. Nipsey, my fedora. That's Coffin Nation, the world's largest online community of culture builders. Click right here. See you on the inside.